Go now.
I'm going to be talking about the discovery of racism in Virginia. The slave trade in Virginia was centered on a very small part of the population who were rich and employed the use of African slaves. The wealthy plantation owners benefited from slave labor. The second, much larger group in society was poor white people in Virginia, which were only 5% able to own slaves. The use of African slaves actually harmed them financially since it reduced job opportunities and choice of work. Despite these setbacks, they fully supported and defended the use of slavery. The reasoning behind this thought was the justification that Virginia had to use to enforce pro-slavery laws such as allowing the killing of a slave to not be considered a felony. Racism in the Virginia colony was encouraged with slave trade after the increase in use of African slavery. Virginia laws had made it legal for African people to not be enslaved and forced some free Africans out of the colony, which resulted in the enslavement of others. As the Virginian people observed these happenings, they began to form an elitist way of thought, which was supported by their government and the society around them. It became Virginian culture to be racist, and to question it was unheard of. Racism was supported by surrounding communities and became a social norm. With the support of a large mass of people, there was no opposition to Virginian slavery laws. It was no matter how biased racists had become, the malicious treatment of slaves overlooked, and runaways were easily caught and returned. There was no desire to assist runaway Africans. Therefore, a slave society was a success, and the Virginian economy was able to be supported by slave labor. The lasting effect of Virginian culture and racism had had a serious consequence on American history and society. The Virginian slave society ensured that slaves were cared for so that they would serve a maximum amount of time, unlike the Spanish colonies where they were worked to death since it was cheaper in those areas. Unfortunately, the care in Virginia did not include education, which carried on for years to come. With education came knowledge and the power to question and if slaves in America were able to form higher thought, then they were able to question their position in society. Throughout the years that followed, in Virginia and eventually other states, black schools received less funding and were undersupplied, unlike white-dominated schools which received more government funding. Racial segregation in America's public resources was legal, and the separation between white and minority schools, transportation, restaurants, and others was not argued since it had been practiced for years, starting with Virginian laws. Laws segregating public resources, however, started the civil rights movement, which aimed to end inequality between races and the communities of America. Though that movement's prime has ended, racism in authoritarian positions persists today. In New York, the stop and frisk law is used to keep their city safe because of the high population, though studies have shown that police brutality is directed towards minorities who are searched more frequently than white people in the area.